Welcome to the Digital Enterprise Society podcast, addressing all aspects of the digital enterprise, inspiring connection without boundaries and creation without limits. Thank you for tuning in. Here are your hosts, Tom Singer and Craig Brown.
Hey there, you have found another episode of the Digital Enterprise Society podcast. This is a special episode that was recorded live at the Digital Intersect Conference put on by the Digital Enterprise Society in Detroit. And this is a two-part episode. So this is part one, where you're going to hear the digital battle between Mark Pendergast and Craig Brown that we conducted live in front of the audience. And then next week, you will get part two of that same live session at Digital Intersect. Enjoy the show.
Time that we get the battle started. So for those of you who listen to the Digital Enterprise Society, every month or so, Craig and Mark come on and they debate different topics. A bunch of you gave us topics about PLM, and they're going to take one side or the other on this. So, is everybody ready to go? All right.
So are we sitting or standing?
No,
Mark?
you're sitting.
He already decided. I thought we were supposed to debate.
We're sitting. You're not debating that. Okay. Nobody wants to see you stand for 45 minutes. Okay. So here's the thing. And the countdown of 3, I'm going to start the recording because this is actually going to become an episode of the Digital Enterprise Society podcast. So if you go to the microphone, you have to go to the microphone to ask a question because we have to be able to record your voice. If after we've done a couple questions, you're like, I have a burning question, come to the microphone and I will call on you. So are we all ready? All right, 3, 2, 1. This is the Digital Enterprise Society podcast, Unplugged, live from the Digital... What is it? We're doing that again. 3, 2, 1. This is the Digital Enterprise Society podcast, Unplugged, coming to you live from Digital Intersect, the Digital Enterprise Society's live event in Troy, Michigan. All right, we are joined by Mark Pendergast and Craig Brown, who are going to take questions from the audience that I have on these wonderful white cards, and they are going to debate the issues. My name is Tom Singer, and I am the host of this podcast, usually along with our battler, Craig Brown. And we've been hosting... Hello, Craig. Glad to have you here in person.
Good to see you. Hey, you know, that picture is kind of cool, you know?
That's a good...
But
of course, the people listening...
We should ask the audience, how long ago was that picture? Consider everything that's happening in the world. How long ago was that picture? Think about that. We'll come back with the answer at the end.
2019, and I will tell you, Craig, it's an audio podcast. You can't...
dang on it!
He can't
I got
point
it
to
wrong
photos
again.
because he forgets the people who are listening
right.
to the podcast. All right, here we go with the questions for the two of you. First of all, why don't you each introduce yourself? Mark, tell everybody who you are and why you're one of our battlers.
Okay, well, my name's Mark Pendergast. I am on the board of the trustees of the Digital Enterprise Society, and I'm responsible for content. And so when I joined the board, I said, hey, we don't have any content. We need to get some. So I started a blog. I invite you all to come to our website and take a look at that. I then was the event of the 100th podcast of these two came up. And we were looking for something special to do. And I said, hey, let's just reverse the tables and we'll interview Craig. Because he's usually interviewing someone else. And make a long story short, everybody else pooped out and it was just me and Craig. And I said, well, I don't want to interview him, that'd be boring. Let's duke it out on some issue. And I can't even remember what issue it was, but we basically took an issue that was, not black and white. It was, something that we had to make decisions on. And we argued for half an hour. And I think it turned into more of a love fest than an argument. But
most of these battles
depends on the topic. So I encourage the audience, find a topic that we disagree on, okay?
Yeah.
It's more entertaining.
But anyway, we explored the topic and we came up with different sides and it worked out really well. And since then, somebody said, hey, you should do more of these. So about once a month, plus or minus, we've been getting together. I have a little spreadsheet where I've got topics that I think are controversial and we duke it out. But I've spent a long time working on PLM. I spent 41 years with General Motors, Delphi Aptiv. I was there, I started manufacturing engineering, kind of worked my way upstream, went into operations, industrial engineering, product engineering, IT. I was responsible for CAD automation at one point. I was responsible for our PLM systems. I got to put in Metaphase, amazing system. And I then retired, and then they asked me back and said, hey, could you deploy Metaphase to another one of our divisions? And I'm retiring again, and they're saying, hey, could you come back and help us replace Metaphase with something else? So I've been around, and I think too much, I guess, is the other thing.
The thing I've noticed after spending several years with you and Craig, neither one of you are very good at retirement. You both keep working. So Craig, tell everybody who you are.
Well, hi, everybody, and to the folks listening in, it's only been 40 years since we sent a spacecraft around the moon. What the heck have we been doing these last 40 years? But anyways, that's the news this week for those of you following it, and it's quite exciting. So our Boeing counterparts, our Northrop Grumman counterparts, they deserve a lot of applause right now. I'm an aerospace engineer who played in the defense industry for about 10 years, and then I joined the automotive industry. And I spent 3 decades here in Detroit. And my last assignment was as the PLM leader for General Motors, and I retired in the beginning of 2019, in the way that worked. And so this notion of retirement, you will all deal with this eventually, and then you'll find out, oh, I still got an itch to scratch. I still want to share some ideas. I still want to be available if people want to ask questions, and so there's some friendly faces in the room, which I haven't seen for 3 years, and my goodness, it's so good to see you all. I wasn't planning the pandemic at the beginning of my retirement. That really didn't help. And so, anyways, that's where I'm at. And I do a few things. I write a little bit for some data. Small companies have asked for some help on they're typically small software companies, and so I consult with them, and that's what I do in my semi-retirement.
Nice.
And I'm having fun doing it. So
awesome. Plus, you're a great co-host for this show. I enjoy having these interviews with you every single week. So let's get going on the questions that have been asked here. The first question is, who owns the digital thread?
Okay, I'll take that one. Well, the digital thread, I don't think is a thing. I guess that's my opinion. It's a process. It's a dynamic, and it's hard to own it. But and it's one of these things where I guess the CEO owns it, but everybody owns pieces of it. And I think it's a concept where it's a collaborative ownership. It's almost like communism. Nobody owns it, but everybody owns it. And that's what makes it so hard to do, is because it's really this ecosystem, almost organic thing that kind of grows and evolves as different people move pieces of it forward. So I think the ownership tends to start in engineering because they tend to be the guys that are more reliant on it. But it's really got tentacles everywhere. And I think some of our presenters brought that up, is that everybody owns it, everybody's advancing their piece of it, and it's almost a gauge of how well your organization knows how to collaborate as to how effective your digital thread is.
I mostly agree with that, except you left somebody out. You left out the customer. Well, the really cool thing about IoT, and I don't mean industrial IoT, that's really important, and everybody's talking about it and they're streamlining industrial, and that's fine. But imagine what's now going to happen with all this consumer data, how a product's being used, or how a product's used in a way we didn't intend. I think engineering in the future is going to be plugged into that ongoing usage data, and for sure is going to maybe even adjust the product while it's in the field. So think about the implications to that. So I think ultimately the digital thread's owned by consumers, the people that buy products.
So the next question is, the digital thread and the digital twin are the new PLM. Is this a new focus, or is this just rebranding? Can I start?
Yeah.
Gosh darn it, you solution vendors, would you stop rebranding? I mean, it just frustrates me to no end, right? It's fine to have buzzwords. I get that it's needed to get executives' attention, especially at car companies. But it feels too much like it's just the next buzzword. It could be what Mark was describing for digital thread, this thing that grows and keeps growing and keeps everybody connected and informed. I mean, it could be much more. So I hope it's not. Poor PLM, those of us that are consultants in the industry, we have a very broad definition of product lifecycle management. Exactly what the words say, product lifecycle management. We don't narrow it to a particular set of parts. We don't narrow it to manufacturing. We talk about the whole life cycle. And I think These other terms, digital thread, well, that's just a realization of how you get the PLM, right? Digital twin, on the other hand, we have twins all the time, right? They're surrogates.
Well, I got a CAD model. Is that my digital twin?
Wait, who's that?
CAD model.
Well, that's one, but they're static. You need to put them into motion to make them meaningful, right? And I think these are fine words, but I don't want them to become buzzwords. Thus my tirade at the beginning of this. Don't make it a buzzword. Make it real. So bring your real examples. Talk about them. Publish them. Get people aware that a digital twin is a thing that exists for a moment in time, and then a few days later, there's a different digital twin. And I'm not talking about a human army that keeps it up to date. It ought to all be automatic. All the technology's here. Whenever I want to ask a question, I should see the surrogate and be able to make a decision on it.
Okay.
Just a buzzword, or is it something else?
Well, I tell you what, I'm not sure that it's a rebranding of PLM, because I don't think many of us are doing that. It's probably a rebranding of PDM.
Good point.
Which is probably a rebranding of the electronic print room back from when we got started. But I think fundamentally, I like these rebrandings to some extent, because they're increasing the scope of thought about what it could do for you. Now, admittedly, we are terrible at taking advantage of all these great leaps of thought, but having them out there is aspirational. Mm-hmm. And when we said PLM, most of the time we stopped at the door where the security guard said, just leave that in the plant. And I think digital twin especially, and digital thread, imply going beyond the boundaries of the four walls of your factory. And I like it for that reason. I dislike it for the same reason you have, is that, well, it's just, more lipstick on PDM, but...
well, that's our choice. All of us in this industry, we could choose to make it the broader thing, right?
We could.
Not be the branding that just justifies the next budget cycle, right?
Right. But, fundamentally, we're all doing work group CAD data vaulting and putting some pixie dust on it and calling it PLM. And I think aspirationally, digital twin, digital thread have helped me, kind of extend where my brain is looking in the solution space. But fundamentally, I'm still slogging to get these guys to even vault their CAD models. So, it's
interesting.
I think, again, it moves the conversation along, because it kind of breaks down some walls that we had built around ourselves, broke some paradigms. But on the other hand, are we taking advantage of that? Hey, CAD data is getting vaulted, drawings make it to the floor. We're kind of stuck in 1993, I think.
We should fix that. Well, you should fix it. I'm done fixing it.
So the next question kind of veers onto a different topic. So today, during the breakout sessions, we had a whole track that was around corporate culture. And this question is corporate culture more like a bowling ball, or is it more like a bowl of spaghetti?
I'll go first.
I'll take it.
It's spaghetti. That's all I'm going to say. It's spaghetti.
It's just spaghetti. All right.
Okay. Well,
overcooked spaghetti. Because it's mushy in it. And never mind.
Well, I don't know. I can see it both ways.
Okay.
So if you look at culture, it's many things, right? It's not just one thing. And I think, if you think about this, as a bowling ball, well, if you're trying to do a new digital transformation or whatever, and you're not paying attention to culture, you're going to learn what a bowling ball to the face looks like, right? Yet, if you're really skilled at understanding your culture and manipulating it, you can do some amazing stuff.
Well, that's true.
Now, on the other hand, you look at it as a bowl of spaghetti, it is kind of mushy, and it's not really homogeneous, right? So you got to tease apart the little strands and say, oh, well, this is my site's culture, or this is the engineering culture,
and
or the purchasing culture.
Don't fall apart as you pull on them, right?
Well, but that's just it. It's almost like a stir fry, right? You got all this stuff in there, and you're trying to understand it all, and it's all coming together, and you get kind of the sum is greater than the parts. But and it's just it's mushy, but like I said, it's homogeneous. A lot of times, corporate culture will outlast leaders, people. In fact, one of my favorite sayings is you can take everybody in an organization and slowly replace them one at a time until nobody's there, but the culture will stay. Because it's so persistent, like a bowling ball.
Oh, that's a bowling ball.
But it's
Interesting.
mushy and amorphous, kind of like a bowl of spaghetti. So I can see both ways. I guess if I had to pick, I'd pick the bowling ball because...
Is that what you desire, or is that...
No, I think it's because culture is solid, it's immutable, it's hard to change, and if you can use it effectively, you can do some magical things. So I'll go that way.
Okay.
Greg, your thoughts?
It's spaghetti.
You're just going to leave it at spaghetti. All right.
And it's overcooked.
Mushy spaghetti is your culture. All right. So,
Wait.
What?
Come on.
Oh, if anybody has questions, you can come up to the microphone and I'll call on you as soon as you're up there. So, but you have to come to the microphone so the people on it can hear the recording when this goes to the podcast. So the next question is, we're going to back to digital thread. Do you need IoT to have a digital thread?
I already answered that.
It was a fresh question.
Any point? You agree or disagree?
I don't remember what you said.
I said that you
I never
had to have
listened to you anyway.
information from a consumer through
No.
measurements, which is IoT, to really make your digital thread useful, right?
Yeah. Well,
So the digital thread's owned by the consumer. That was my answer.
Okay. Yeah. No, the digital thread is many things to many people. And I will tell you, we had a digital thread back when we were on drafting boards. It was kind of klutzy and expensive to
These
run.
digits?
And well, no, but it was a digital thread. I mean, again, this is a rebranding, right? I can go right back to the drafting boards, and I can show you how that draftsman talked to these guys, and they passed, what do we used to call them, GM? AVOs, avoid verbal orders. They passed the little notes back and forth. And so we had it back then. I mean, this was your whole point. We've been doing this forever.
Yeah.
It's just the tools are maturing to the point that we can do it well. And I think, do you need IoT? No. Does it open up all kinds of vistas of things you can do? Yes. But we had a digital thread when I hired in. It just wasn't called that, and it was really hard to make it do anything useful.
Well, and I guess I want to amplify my point. But now, because we all have all kinds of sensors, I think, Simon, you were showing a picture of a phone and all the stuff that's on it, right? That can measure stuff, right? Including where we're at and what we're doing, and so how we're moving. To me, that's insight that a product guy would just love to know, ideally before they build the product. But even as they build the product, then you can add new things to your product based on that digital thread. And so that's why I think IoT and digital thread are, there's a universe out there. A handful of you are already exploring it. Anybody putting out new batteries in cars are for sure doing IoT, whether your consumers know it or not, and it's helping. We're going to shorten the learning cycle for how fast we can bring reliable batteries to the car business. It'll be a handful of years, not decades like other technology was in the past. And it's just because we're sensing it. In the past, the sensing was expensive. I had to get you to agree to let me put a recorder in your car, and then I would record for 2 months or 2 years, and then I would come back and analyze it. Well, that can all be done interactively now if you let me have access to your usage, whether that's your phone or your car or whatever. And I think some of the companies that maybe aren't as clear about the mining they're doing with your data, the mining's going on. Somebody's going to figure this out. Yeah, exactly. You want to ask a question? You have to go to the mic, Nan. Those are the rules.
Part of the show now.
Say your name and ask your question.
All right, Nan Kocher with Siemens. It's not a question. I agree with Craig on this since it's a battle. So I'm trying to get the battle a little bigger.
Okay.
IoT is part of it. The insights and the data you're collecting is primarily, in a lot of cases, coming from IoT devices, whether you call it a digital twin of a physical and a virtual world, coming together. So I just wanted to take on that side that's what it is. The value add is through different names, closed loop processes, getting insights from the field, battery management systems.
So-
we just touched
So
on.
Dan, help our whole audience. So when we, in the past, did this was the quality department collecting this field data, right? engineering was done. We were on to the next product, right? Isn't this all going to have to change? Shouldn't chief engineers, the product engineering, shouldn't they want to know, well, how everybody's using my product? I mean, it seems to me they really ought to plug in and pay attention. Right. I think electric vehicle guys, in fact, are doing this, and it's just different. You wouldn't have been able to do that without a digital thread, let alone adding these real-time measurements, right?
You're absolutely right. So in new startups, so to say, which don't have these traditional silos, they don't even know there's a separate quality department which collects all this data, right? They're going like, I need this information. They collect that data and they use it.
Right.
So I think that's the big difference. Absolutely, the data is needed at the design phase, at a verification, as well as closing the loop with the manufacturing. So based on the scenario, that's where you use it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Dan.
All right, our next question is the digital thread active or passive? Is it a thing or is it a tool?
Well, I already answered this one, so I'm going to throw this one over to Craig and see what he says, and then I'll critique his response.
It should be active. It needs to be active. All the technology pieces are here, so there's no reason not to make it active. So therefore, it's not a thing, it's a verb. It's not a noun, it's a verb, okay? And I think the leaders 5 years from now, 10 years from now, the companies left standing, a lot of us are here in Detroit, so we'll talk car companies for a moment, will be the ones that figured that out. And don't underestimate the OEMs. They know what they're doing. They've gotten their wake-up call a few years ago. So my money's on Detroit, but we'll see. Anything else?
Well, like I said, it's a process. It's kind of this living, organic thing. Organic. And I think, to the point of the previous question, it's growing. It's getting more and more capability. But I tell you what, the pharaohs sent guys out, Internet of Serfs, to say, hey, is the pyramid, getting built or not? So we've had it for a long time. But no, I think it's something that is dynamic. If it's going to be useful, it has to be dynamic. It has to be bidirectional, which is what you've been preaching here. And it needs to be automated. I forget if it was our Siemens friends that said that or not. But if you want human beings to be shoving this stuff around, you're going to price yourself out of the market. It's got to shove stuff around, and through machine learning and AI and whatever, it needs to be telling you things you don't know.
Awesome. So, and again, anybody can come up to the mic and ask their own question, but our next question that came in early was, where should you start implementing collaborative design? Internal or with external partners?
Oh.
Craig,
well, if you knew how to do it, you would do it internally. The reason you bring external partners is because they have a skill you don't have. And so the first part of your question, as early as possible, right? And if you don't know how to do that, then you should go find a partner that does know how to do that. Whether that's for an OEM, is that another OEM? It could be, right? Or it could just be somebody in a different industry who happens to really get how to do this, right? No offense to consultants, I play one now. We can help start things, but if you want to change the culture, we were talking about culture before, you got to internalize that. And so you've got to be ready to learn from this expert and then do it yourself. If you hire it as a short-term thing, a truly external relationship, then you'll forget how to do it the second you get rid of them, which will happen in a downturn of an economic cycle, right? So it needs to be internal. If you don't have the skill, then hire to learn. But the goal is to learn it, right? Not to avoid it.
Well, I think you need to start internally, and I'm going to come at this from a different direction than you did. When you talk about collaborative design, there's different tiers of it. And you can be talking about 5 guys laying out an IC and having to figure out how to get all the cells in. You can be talking about the systems engineer, the software engineer, the mechanical engineer, electrical engineer have to do a collaborative design. You can talk about external partners who are now putting your IoT in the cloud for all your smart products out there. And you need to collaborate with them. So there's many, many levels of collaborative design. That's why I've struggled so much with that topic, because I don't know which piece of that we're talking, or are we talking about all of it? But I think if you don't know how to collaborate internally in your shop, you can't collaborate with like external development partners. Let's say I know some of our stuff is up integrating stuff into ICs. Hey, you see all this stuff on the circuit board? Put it in the IC, and then we'll have a cheaper, smaller product. Well, you can't work with those guys if you don't know how to work internally, collaboratively, because there's key practices, there's key metrics that you got to learn internally. Now, do you need to do collaborative IC development? Do you need 6 guys laying out that circuit board? Maybe not. Maybe you don't start there. I'll guarantee you the systems engineer better be cracking the whip on all the other functions, or you're never going to get a product off the line. And external partners are becoming more and more important because you just can't keep all this expertise in your team. You just can't afford it. So you go rent it, for the piece that you need. But I think fundamentally, if you don't have a framework internally to understand how collaboration happens and who's responsible and how you get that accountability, I don't see how you could possibly then be successful with external partners unless you got really good lawyers and purchasing agents who are taking care of you.
That doesn't work either. We just get frustrated and leave.
So our next question is, can you have a digital thread without a digital twin? And then it's got a second question. Can you have a digital twin without a digital thread?
Yeah, maybe it'd help if we had one term. I don't have a smart, intelligent answer for that question.
Well, let me take a crack.
Yeah, I mean, the